And so, the young people of America prepare for bed, ready for the coming school year, sort of. But there is one more thing they must see. The world premiere of the music video from Darkwing Duck.
Follow me to a place where incredible feats are routine every hour or so. Where enchantment runs rampant, just wild in the streets. Open sesame, here we go!
Welcome back to Disney Marvels for week of September 13th, 2020. This is episode 101. Disney Marvels, the show about Disney, Marvel, Lucasfilm, Muppets, Pixar, 20th Century, the parks, and much, much more. If it has to do with Disney, it's fair game. I'm your host, Matthew Graken. Hey, thank you again. Episode 101. Thank you for everyone who's reached out. Fans, listeners, family, friends, former people that have been former guests on this show. It's again, I can't thank you enough for being part of this one way or another. And it means a lot to me that your congratulations and just the well wishes, the appreciation really means a lot. And thank you. I hope you enjoyed this week. This week, part 2 of the Disney Afternoon with Tad Stone talking about his time with Disney Animation, even Imagineering. Some great stories that he shared with us. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed talking to Tad. And I think it was you'll get some spectacular stuff out of it. So we'll be right back with Tad Stone after these messages and words from our friends and sponsors.
Hey guys, it's Kyler Pope from the Disney Theme Park Show the Second. I just wanted to tell you about my great podcast, the Disney Theme Park Show the Second, where I talk to wonderful guests such as Matthew Graken about all things Disney. I am available on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, and Radio Public as of now, and I hope you guys have a magical day.
And now, on with the show.
Darkwing Duck! Darkwing Duck! Darkwing Duck!
Mentioned before how important the Disney Afternoon is to television, not just to me, but to so many other people, and just television history in general. Today I have someone. He is the terror that writes in the night. He is the producer of many television shows. He is the one, the only, Tad Stone. Tad, thank you for coming on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here with you, sort of, virtually.
Virtually. As I was talking to somebody else, I was on someone else's show saying how, imagine in Wall-E, people talking and communicating with each other virtually and not in person. Who would ever have thought that?
Yeah, exactly. You mean, wait a minute, is this a whole big marketing scheme by Disney?
No,
for a
never.
Wall-E sequel? No. Oh my God.
They would never do such a
they
thing.
won't go to.
No. Well, that's Pixar. That's all, their end. That's
It's
their
all Disney.
Yeah, now it is. Now it is. Yeah, speaking of the Pixar and Disney and stuff, from my understanding, you grew up in the Burbank area?
Yeah. In fact, I was literally born across the street from the studio at St. Joseph's Hospital.
Wow.
So I was, depending on the early days, at the early hours of the morning, I guess the shadow of the studio probably hit my window.
That's something else. So did that influence you in any sorts of ways growing up that, here you were just steps away from all the, it wasn't even just Disney studios. A bunch of them were in that area at the time. I actually had a lot of connections to Disney, and then that one, because my mom worked at St. Joe's in administration, and there would be, I remember Christmas charity programs and things like that, and often Disney guys would come over, and Burbank would have a carnival uptown, and I remember at least twice
once at the Hospital Auditorium for a Christmas show, and then at a summer carnival up in Burbank, or in the, I can't say uptown, toward the foothills anyway, Burbank. Ducky Nash had a ventriloquist act that he'd do with Donald Duck. And so I saw that a couple of times. And then even more so, my dad worked for Carnation Company. And because they had the deal with Disneyland, their company picnic, their yearly company picnic, was at Disneyland. And again, I was born in 52. So these are the early days of Disneyland. But right about where the Pirates of the Caribbean sit now in Anaheim was literally a park with mowed grass and some picnic tables.
Right.
I remember going. It was
outside the berm there.
Yeah. I wasn't even much of a berm at that time. I guess the railroad would have. Yeah, we would have been on the outside of the railroad, crossing the tracks, going to the park. But I remember they pitched a big tent, and the Golden Horseshoe Review put on a show for us there. I remember Wally Bogue spitting out teeth famously.
Oh, wow.
That was one of his bits. And then they played bingo there. And it didn't occur to me as a kid, because I was literally, a little tiny kid. But it's like, wait, you're playing bingo when Disneyland is right there? Yeah. I mean, literally right there. It's like less than 100 feet away, and you're playing B11.
I can smell the churros.
Pretty much. So anyway, because of that, we went to Disneyland as I was growing up once a year. My dad had wanted to be a cartoonist, but he came out of college in the Depression, and basically you took any job you could get.
Right.
He never, was able to follow that up. But he had lots of, art books and drawing books, and not just, fine art stuff. It was literally cartooning stuff. And some of those were the early books on animation. And so that was always in my blood early on. We went to Disneyland, and they had, I remember we bought the Bob Thomas book, The Art of Animation, which was themed around Sleeping Beauty, but took you through the steps of animation. And you bought flip books. How many people bought cells for like $2, and then they just got destroyed instead of being worth hundreds of dollars. But I just love that. And of course, the Disneyland television show, Walt would go behind the scenes every once in a while and show tricks of the trade of animation and all that. And I was fascinated by all that stuff. So it was something I wanted to do, from the get-go.
And to think that growing up, that was just down the street, more or less for you.
Pretty much. Yeah. So Disney was a part of the community.
Yeah.
At least for a kid, in that some of those people would show up, at various events, more so than Warner Brothers, which was arguably closer to my house. And I remember Columbia Ranch, which is now Ranch. It's a couple blocks of back lot. Mm-hmm. That was where they filmed Circus Boy with Mickey Dolenz. You'd have to Google that for most people. Anyway, now there's a Vons and a bunch of apartments there, but there used to be this big vacant piece of land, and that's where they would film, and we'd go and catch lizards there. That was where they filmed exterior scenes. I mean, it wasn't studio property. They just would use some of that. But the ranch is still there. I mean, it's burned several times. And I was living across the street from it one of the times it burned. And now that's where Warner Brothers Animation is located.
I was going to say around that area too, or I think just the other side of the hills where MASH was filmed, and Hogan's Heroes, and a bunch of those other.
MASH is actually closer to where I am now. I'm in Simi Valley. MASH was filmed in the Agoura Hills, which also routinely burned down. In fact, the MASH set burned down a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that's a shame. Another one of my favorite shows growing up. Yeah, so you went there, and so how did you get into the Disney company? I mean, you've always been on the footstep of it, and you've been kind of, progressing your way towards there. But how did you finally get the golden ticket to join the company?
When I was growing up, again, I loved animation. Discovered Marvel Comics very early on and thought, well, maybe I can be a comic book artist and writer.
Good move.
And when I was in high school and about to go to college, I felt like, well, I really would want to go into animation, but the only place that does full animation is Disney, and they've got their guys. They've still got the guys that started with Walt. So I don't know, maybe I'll do comics. So that was my mindset going into college. In college, when I was a junior, was when I met her, a girlfriend of mine, who happens to now be my wife, her sweet mate, her sweet mate was Tori Atencio, who's now an interior designer, I believe, at Imagineering. Her father was Ex Atencio, a famous layout guy, also famous over at Imagineering. Worked with Ward
Haunted
Kimball.
Mansion.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, because of her connection of her father, she knew that there was a training program at Disney. And once I was only an art major for freshman year, and then my English teachers wanted me to move to English because of my writing, and I was torn. And then there was a new major called Humanities that sounded like, oh, you can do both. Strangely, it didn't work out that way. Ended up not taking a single writing course, and almost all my art courses were three-dimensional. I became a TA in ceramics. In fact, I was throwing pots and all that, which did help out later because I was showing some of my old stuff, and Tori looked at it and she said, and she knew my cartooning work just from around school. She said, you ought to apply at Disney. I went, what do you mean at Disney? She goes, well, they have this training program now. And she knew the name of the guy in charge of the training program because it's hard to forget his name. His name was Donald Duckwall. He claimed he had the name first. Anyway, I got the number. I called for information, and they assumed I wanted an appointment. So I had, as I recall, about a week to create a portfolio of art in my senior year, having not been an art major since freshman year. Luckily, here's where that ceramics teacher thing falls in. The head of the art department took a sabbatical that year, and the ceramics teacher was the acting head of the art department. And when I told him what was up, he said, by all means, I'll tell the teachers you can sit in on the life drawing classes, and basically so I could get a portfolio together in quick time. So I showed my stuff. They needed a few more sketches. They needed more action sketches. I thought now once I got in, I realized that sometimes people came back like 6 months later for a second appointment. I thought they wanted it immediately. Maybe they did because there was a review board meeting coming up. So I spent that weekend drawing off the television, off sports events, cheating a bit with, I was never a sports guy, but the other guys in the hall had Sports Illustrated magazines, so I'd, pull some great poses out of there, but just do real quick sketches. And strangely enough, they had, and this is before VCRs, you couldn't stop things and freeze frame and stuff like that. Yeah. But the idea of me drawing from life off the TV just hadn't occurred to them, and it became something that they would tell potential trainees. Anyway, I surprisingly was accepted, which was then basically spent 8 weeks doing a personal test with Eric Larson, one of the 9 old men. And thankfully, I knew a lot about animation, because the idea if you knew nothing and you're kind of trying to learn animation while doing the test that will determine your fate could be a little, crazy making.
Right.
Anyway, I survived both the review boards, and the review board was actually made up of what was left of the 9 old men at the studio, plus Ken Anderson, Claude Coates would come over, I think, sometimes. Anyway, some guys from various departments, and to look at stuff. So that's how I got in. And then at Features, you instantly became an in-betweener. So again, all the work was done at the studio, so you learned animation. And I was terrible at in-betweening. Almost got fired because of my in-betweening.
No.
What a
Well,
different
we're thankful
history
you didn't.
we would have, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, when people say, "Oh, how do you get in animation?" I say, "Well, you fall in love with the girl, you end up marrying her. She has to be connected to Disney." No, everybody got in different ways. That was before CalArts.
Isn't this an upcoming Tom Hanks movie?
Yes, I think so. Anyway, so that's how it was. A confluence of influences and people I knew, and just hearing that there was a possibility there. And I don't know what I would have done, frankly, if I hadn't heard about that. So,
Eric Larson, you said specifically you got to he kind of
Eric was Eric Larson was the training program. He sat in his office. There were two bigger offices at the end of the hall, and that's where the trainees would be. And it wasn't like there was a big class of trainees. It was like I was the only one who came in at that review board. Then the next one had, like I say, Glenn made it. And then there were other people who made it and then didn't last or there for a while. So that was your office for a while, even after you did that. But basically, you'd be doing drawings. You take them into Eric, and he'd go over them with you. My regret, and I have lots of regrets, but I always have to tell myself, well, it kind of worked out, so you did okay. But because I knew a lot of the basics of animation, I didn't spend as much time with Eric as in hindsight I should have.
Right.
In fact, with any of those guys, because I always had this thing, I don't want to bother them, and it's a professional thing, we shouldn't do it. And I remember when Milt Kahl left and everybody was getting him to sign the books, and I kind of made a joke out of it, but I didn't have him sign the book, and it was like, yeah, I didn't establish relationships with all that. The most I learned from animation was, or at least a more sophisticated, version of animation, was from Frank Thomas through Ron Clemens, because Ron and I shared an office. And Ron, everybody knows he's a director and writer of Little Mermaid and Aladdin and Moana and everything in between. Ron had done a personal test that showed at the same time as mine's second one, and it was Cruella de Vil, and the animators commented that they thought it was good enough to have been in the original film. That was not an exaggeration. It was amazing that it could have been, it would have fit right in. It might have been a touch broader than she would have been, but it was incredible. Anyway, so Frank Thomas immediately snatched up Ron to be working with him. So Ron would come back from a meeting with Frank, and then I would just hit him with 20 questions and all that. And he would review everything, which he didn't mind because he says, well, it kind of helps set it in my mind.
Right.
So a lot of it was secondhand through Ron.
But it still had to have been something to be around these people that worked directly with Walt. And just that history. I mean, these people transformed animation as anyone knew it, and working on Snow White and Jungle Book and all these other amazing films. In hindsight now, amazing films. Back then, they were hoping that they would bring in $5 sometimes.
Yeah. Well, a few years later, I was moved over to WED, now known as Imagineering. And I spent a good 9 months in like an 8x12 office with Ward Kimball, just he and I. And working with Ward was like working with a time machine, because everything was fresh from him, from being, how to build a go-kart with a steering wheel as a little kid, to wartime era stuff with Walt. It was the one time that I wish I'd kept a diary, but I had a new little boy, so it wasn't like I come home and say, sorry, son, I can't hug you. I have to write down my experiences with Ward Kimball. So it was, I half remember stuff, but that was great.
Let me touch on that since you brought it up. So what did you work on when you were over at WED/Imagineering?
I'm not sure they knew what to do with me over in animation. And one of the things I had done was I wrote and storyboarded and produced an educational film called Health and Alcohol Abuse. And because I did a good job on that, and it had an educational thing, they said, well, we've got this quasi-educational thing going on at Imagineering. Let's send you over there. So I went over, and helping out on little things here and there, but my 3 major projects was the World of Motion ride. Ward Kimball and I did. I guess Mark Davis had been on it originally, because we had it was a series of scenes. It's no longer there, done in Pirates of the Caribbean type technology. Anyway, I did that with him. And then about the time that goes to get done, they moved me with Tim Delaney onto the Space Pavilion. You'll notice there's no Space Pavilion at Epcot.
Well,
anyway, we spent
not that one. Yeah.
We spent a good portion of the time we were on it unselling people from what had been done before, because that's when I learned the term eyewash, where you'd have these incredible painters. Herb Ryman, and I think he might have done the main one. But anyway, they do just this fantastic painting of this building, and you talk about it. They do these incredible paintings that would just be these incredible pieces of artwork, and then somebody would talk about how great the pavilion was going to be. And it was all talk and visuals. And then when you go in to work at it, the Space Pavilion had been painted as this giant ball with a pylon next to it. And the idea was, you had 360 theaters. Someone said, what if you do the 360 theater vertically? And the whole building was supposed to rotate for, I don't know, to change your feeling of gravity, which didn't quite work. But so we got into it to start, and they had scripts in the show, and I met science fiction writer Joe Haldeman, who's a friend of mine now. We looked at it and we said, okay. One, the engineers said, to get it up to speed, just to get moving, because you're moving concrete and steel, will take 8 minutes, which is as long as the show is. So it's like, that makes no sense. And talk about breakdowns, that what could happen. And then we just said on the inside, you're inside the sphere, and you're looking across at the audience on the other side. The circle is going vertically in between you. And when you looked at the screen, they would draw these, the eyewash had these planets and galaxies out there. And I said, well, if you're looking sideways at a screen from this point of view, you're not going to see a circle. You'll see an oval. Mm-hmm. And I said, because it's curved, you're going to see a curved oval. So it's pretty much the planet's going to look like a banana in space. And Walt always said, you have to accept some seats with not the best point of view. But the way we mapped it out and looked, we said there were more seats with a bad point of view than there were a good seat. And then down at the bottom, you're supposed to be looking down at the captain and crew, which would be animatronic figures. So we spent a lot of time. They shot a test footage, and the brightest part of the whole experience was I got to meet George Lucas. We had a lunch in a conference room, with all the planners, and Tim and I were the youngest guys, there. Everybody else were, the veterans, and Ron Miller, the head of the company, and anyway, I happened to sit exactly across from George Lucas, and I looked at him. We were having fried chicken, and I looked at him and I said, "I'm sorry, my friends in animation would kill me if I didn't ask you about Star Wars." And I think this was before Empire, would be my guess. Anyway, he explained to me there were 9 pictures, 9 stories, which he later denied for a while, and that nobody would like the first 3. And it was like, why? And he said, well, because the first 3 will be like this political drama, how things get going and all that. And, years later, obviously, I thought, it's your story to tell. If you think nobody's going to like the first 3, why don't you tell a different story?
Change it up a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was interesting. But the other important thing is George lived up in the San Francisco area, still does. Tim Delaney, I think, had a girlfriend up there. Anyway, he'd be commuting to San Francisco, and he ended up on the shuttle flight next to George Lucas as George is coming down for another meeting. And so Tim has the chance to basically say, okay, here's what we're up against. And he goes through the banana planets and the stars and all of that. Right. And, George helped unsell them. And then we could get started after that on, okay, what could the Space Pavilion be? And what that quickly ran into was Epcot was all about the future. Mm-hmm. And every pavilion their last act tended to be set in space. More importantly than that, they made a decision early on that instead of having lands like Disneyland, they would have these pavilions. And instead of breaking up the pavilions into that could be sponsored by different companies, they needed each of those pavilions to be sponsored by one company, which immediately cut down the number of people you could get to invest.
Right.
They not only had to be a big company, they had to have, $35-40 million that they could just blow on PR kind of stuff. There were no space companies that were that big.
No.
And could spare the money to do that kind of, PR stuff. So that just ended up dissolving. And that's when I finished out my time with Tony Baxter and Barry Braverman and Tom Morris on the Imagination Pavilion. And, was in Dreamfinder. Figment had already been created. Mm-hmm. And we were still fleshing out personalities and what it could be in the whole pavilion. And I was on that through the sale to Kodak. And there you go.
Big Figment person.
Originally, Figment was actually blue-green until the Sherman Brothers came in and did a song. And they used purple pigment to describe his color. And I said, well, he's not purple. And he said, well, you got to go for the alliteration, the scanning. I go, well, blue-green pigment, purple pigment, still has the same number of syllables. But, I was being silly, and they won because, they were the Sherman Brothers.
Well,
and they had this great song.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so those are my few accomplishments. I was then sent back to the studio. I was supposed to be in charge of these Epcot documentaries. Each documentary would be on the theme of the pavilion to be run in prime time on networks. And basically the company was living in a world that had long passed, meaning a world where networks were begging Walt to do anything. The new world was saying, literally, we have our own news departments to do low-rated documentaries, and this is in the middle of our new television season. We're not going to pull off our brand new shows we're trying to get established to put on a documentary about the land. The thing I did when I was on the project was changed it to 4 documentaries, and instead of being on the subject matter of each pavilion, it was future human, future home, future city, future Earth. And each one we're talking about the future of the human body, from exoskeletons, prosthetics, cloning, whatever science fiction comic, I could do. Future home. Someday we'll have computers in our homes. Yes, well, that was just at the beginning, and a lot of that stuff that we made gags about, we do.
Yeah, Andy 1000.
And then the only problem, and I never had to solve it, Future City was about transportation and how to organize a city and dome cities, undersea cities, whatever. Was Future Earth. Everything looked really grim because of overpopulation. And that was even before people worried about climate change. So thankfully, I never had to do that. But that was the end of my, Imagineering association.
Right. So we're in. Okay, so obviously that ended. Where do you go from there?
Well, I started feature animation on the original Rescuers. Got up to assistant animator. Moved into story on Fox and Hound. I don't have a credit, although the stupid worm got a credit.
What? That's a nice picture. It's underrated, I think.
I mean, go into it. At one point, it was, I think, much better than what it was, and then they kept messing with it, but lost a lot of the emotion. But I knew back then that was before everybody got credits. There was only a few cards full of credits,
right?
And I knew I probably wouldn't get a credit because all my work had been done before I left for Imagineering, and that's when the directors changed from Willie Rytherman to Art Stevens and Rick Rich to Berman. So I was told, well, you're not going to be getting a credit. And I was kind of fine with that because I expected it.
Right.
Until I found out that they were giving credit to Squeaks the Worm as himself because they thought it was a fun gag because he was a sound effect that they would do it. And it was like, we're just talking about a little bit of writing on a card. You could slip my name.
Come on.
That all changed, with Black Cauldron when that began the era of modern credits that everybody and their babies get credits. Anyway, so that's what I had done at features. We've been over my Imagineering stuff. Came back after those documentaries. I helped out in a general sense in the live action television on their various fantasy projects. I worked on the Donald's 50th anniversary with Dick Van Dyke. There was a good year and a half that I always say, oh, Disney should have fired me. I was doing nothing. I was doing stuff, but nothing that really, if I had to talk to an accountant to describe what I was doing, I'd be up a creek. Anyway, I came back and to feature animation, and the problem was whenever they moved me, and I'd been there long enough that I would get like a little bump in pay. So now my pay was higher, but they didn't have an easy place to slot me in. Just the nature of the business. You have a story team. You don't suddenly say, hey, remember Tad? Let's bring him back in and put him on this. And he's going to be paid more than you guys. So they said they were going to have to bump me down, but instead that was going to happen. It was like, what was I going to do?
Yeah.
Instead, they had the people over in licensing had a project or potential projects. They knew their problem was feature animation. The films came out every 4 or 5 years. The department, when I showed up, I thought it was 65 people without ink and paint. Reason I've been told it was actually just 55 people. So that's how small this department was that Walt created that were doing these feature films.
Right.
Anyway, they still wanted to sell toys, and instead of waiting every 4 years and for re-releases, which, don't create the buzz that a new project does, they knew they had to be in TV some way. So they were looking at maybe making television specials. So I went to this meeting with this group from licensing. One of the people there was the head of Disneyland Records, Gary Kreisel, who, working with Jim Magan, actually, really recreated the records from a nothing part of the division to this powerhouse. And it was because they actually created new content for kids. Going Quackers and Partners and, Mickey, Donald, and Goofy, basically they did, fun songs with Disney characters. Anyway, so they were part of this meeting, at least Gary was, I believe. And they said, well, we've got a couple of projects. We're just looking for half-hour ideas. We do have one in Europe. Sport Goofy is a huge character for soccer. We could do something with that. That would be great. So, and there was, another writer there and all that. I went away and worked, we used to do storyboards literally on giant bulletin boards. They were like 4 by 8 feet long. And you'd literally be pinning. You've seen them in the background of every behind the scenes feature. You pin up your drawings. Well, what I did is I had animation paper and I just drew in ink and marker, just kind of story. Sometimes it was a single character, just scenes on a piece of animation paper, and just pinned those up so I could tell the story. And I did a presentation called Mickey and the Space Pirates, and then I did one with Sport Goofy, and the premise was the Huey, Dewey, and Louie are on a soccer team, ragtag soccer team. Their coach is Goofy, and to get to help the league or something, they need a trophy. And Uncle Scrooge said, "Oh, there's something in the money bin that you could have." This kind of goes against the lore that Scrooge knows everything about everything in the money bin.
Right.
There's this trophy, and they take it. He says they have it, and it's like it turns out to be hugely, priceless or whatever. But he can't take it back. He has to win it back. So Scrooge becomes the sponsor of the team. So this was not a precursor to DuckTales in any direct way. It was just all of us looking at the same source material, which was Carl Barks. And, I grew up with those comics and all that. So anyway, next meeting was called. I came in. The other writer just had like log lines because he was their staff guy who was working on many projects. And he just turned them over and put them face down because I had these full color storyboards, and I went through Mickey and the Space Pirates and then, Sport Goofy, and they were blown away. And it really impressed them that I was able to come up with this stuff, that I was both an artist and a writer. And I end up doing a whole board on Sport Goofy. Later on, it was taken over by Daryl Van Sitters, who worked with a lot of names we know now, like Chris Buck, Joe Ranft, Mike Giamo, who's art director on Frozen. Chris Buck, who directed Frozen. Joe Ranft obviously was the heart of Pixar. Anyway, that they took it over, and I basically backed off because they were supposed to start learning to work on the team. And they had actually worked on little animated pieces I had done for my Epcot specials. We put that animation into work and then tied them together in a short subject called Fun with Mr. Future. Anyway, here they are again. They kind of took out a lot of the heart and story and made it more gags.
Right.
And then that dissolved, and later on it was revisited by Features and with advice by Ward Kimball, and they rewrote it, reconcocted it, and put it out as a television special, which is very funny because it came out the year before DuckTales, and I got called into the boss's office, and they were like, they really wanted to be mad at me because there was my name under story. It was Tad Stones and Joe Rampton, whoever the third guy was. And I said, "Oh, I forgot that was on," or something, and I'm just up because it's like,
yeah,
I didn't have anything to do with this, getting this on the air. And they were really upset that this, as far as they're concerned, could blow the whole DuckTales thing because it wasn't a DuckTales story. It didn't have the adventure parts in it. It had lots of Beagle Boys and a lot of just gags, but not the kind of stuff they wanted into DuckTales. But it's like ultimately they couldn't blame me, but it was like a fun meeting for me because it's like they really wanted to, but they couldn't. And we
liked it, but he shouldn't have.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so that project, when it came time, when Michael Eisner came to the company, Michael Eisner started at TV animation and at ABC, children's programming. He knew animation had to, I'm sure he had early meetings with licensing, and they said, we really want to we have to find a way to get into television. It was important to him in that the Sunday of his first week at the company, he following his first week. He had a meeting at his house, and it was like 10 people. And the guys from licensing all remembered me from those presentations I had done years earlier and how fast I'd come up with stuff, and I was creative, and they liked working with me. So that's why I was there at the original meeting for TV animation. In fact, I pulled out Mickey and the Space Pirates. Frank Wells was there too, and they loved what they were seeing, but Mike said it was, Mickey's too important, too precious. We have to make sure we can do this well. They can't be our first projects, but let's hang on to that. And famously, one of the things he pitched at the meetings, his kids had just gone to summer camp, and all they could come back, they were totally fixated on this new candy at the time called gummy bears. He says, I swear, you do a show called Gummy Bears, and it's going to be a huge hit. So I went back to wherever, I think, Random Development, and I was actually thinking of leaving the company, and I thought, what if I could freelance storyboard and come close to my current salary, and then I can write science fiction short stories or something for my soul or whatever. And I happened to see Michael Webster, who was head of the division at that point, TV animation, and he said, oh, you don't want to freelance, why don't you come visit us? So I show up at the studio, which was only a couple of hallways long and off lot, and he's kind of introducing me around. Tad may be coming over here, or Tad'll be coming over here. And it's like, I don't know why he didn't say anything, but it would seem awkward at the time. Anyway, I ended up at TV animation that way, actually technically in management as creative manager, and coming up with show ideas. I was actually supposed to be bringing in writers from the outside, but I didn't know any writers from the outside because I've been sequestered in Disney for years. Anyway, so we had a gong show where you just pitch short 3 lines about a show, and they either like it or they say gong, next one. And I know we presented 22 ideas, and I think 18 of them were mine, and the others were Jim's, I think. Jim was in, working full-time as a story editor at the time.
You said you'd all kind of you'd have these spit sessions coming up with ideas, and really at the beginning, he said it was a bunch of guys around makeshift desks and just really kind of stuck in a corner somewhere and just trying to get this idea of Eisner's off the ground with not too much direction.
That was before I had gone over, when they were trying to do Gummy Bears. I know for a while they kind of chased the idea of candy, kind of a Candyland thing, and a villain called Licorice Whip. And they actually thought of, much like the early He-Man show had a moral at the end of the show that He-Man would talk to camera. What we learned is, they thought about, we'll need to do a little thing about dental hygiene at the end of the show, which is a bizarre idea. And finally, I don't know, Jim maybe told you whether they presented any of those ideas or they just knew they weren't working, but they basically threw that all out, came up with the whole gummy berry juice and a medieval world, and, kind of created that from whole cloth.
He went into not so much some of the pre stuff, but how they got into the medieval world, being most of the animated movies take place in Europe. A lot of the base source stuff is from Europe, so let's base this in Europe, and kind of went from there. So you worked on that a little bit, and then
what happened is I was, like I say, a creative manager. I was in management and helping early ideas on DuckTales, but then Jim had no experience in television. He had never written a teleplay, and Disney told NBC, this is who our story editor is going to be. Now, the story editor is close to a showrunner, so a showrunner these days, most people would know if they know anything about the industry, is that is the creative lead of a show, that all the scripts are going to go through him. He's going to be working with all the writers and all that. So generally you want somebody very experienced there. And Disney said, this is who we're going with. And they said, well, what scripts have you done? None, and no experience. So they did that for 2 years, and then I think both sides were getting tired of each other, so they wanted a change. So I was told to step in for the 3rd season of Gummy Bears. So that's all I did. I rewrote the Bible to kind of open up the world to new story ideas, making Dunwin more of a hub of trade. And it was just, I was just trying to, it was just massaging. It was the same show, but it was just kind of saying, this is a way to bring in different kinds of characters, more exotic stuff and all of that. And then when it was time to flesh out the Disney Afternoon, Mark Seidenberg and Rich Fogel came on to flesh out everything that a full 65 episodes. So they picked up from there and finished it.
So next came DuckTales. So did you work much on that one?
I would have, up until a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I would have sworn that, oh no, I just gave notes on DuckTales. I never did anything on it. And I'm going through some of the stuff I've saved. And I find this press release about a Valentine's special, and it's an interview with the writer Len Yulee, who still works in animation. And Len's going on and on about his great story editor, Tad Stones. And it was like, oh, I guess I at least did that. So I was I gave notes early on. Then I was into my own show. And that was after that, so DuckTales, it was just like around the edges. Meanwhile, we're trying to come up with new shows. Jim and I, actually, I take it back. In one of our Gong shows, we pitched the idea of, I think it was Ken Kuntz and Dave Weimers, who had been on Wuzzles, also kind of responsible for bringing in the Carl Bark stuff originally in the original conversation about DuckTales. Anyway, they just came up with the name or Miami Mice, and Miami Vice was huge at that time.
Yes, it was.
And the guys, I've said this many times, Jeffrey and Katzenberg and Michael Eisner loved catchy names. They always expected you to do a great show. But they felt like if you had a name that had a hook, more people tune into those early episodes to see what it's all about, and then it's up to you to keep them. So they love Miami Mice. I don't know whether it was a note from legal or we did it on our own, but quickly changed it to Metro Mice. And then Jim and I on Carl Gears, who later did New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, did a first script. We created the villain character Fat Cat. But the problem, the limitation of that was Metro Mice was literally the Hill Street Blues, but on a mouse level. And you couldn't do all those normal cop show stories because it's a kid show and they're mice. How many, so that was a problem. We needed to expand it more general way. So we came up with the idea of what are these, I can remember the part of the freeway where I hit a name just going through alliterations and stuff, but Rescue Rangers. And the head character was Kit Colby, who wore this kind of aviator's jacket with a furry collar. And he had these group of, a chameleon, a cricket, a kangaroo rat, a fly, and this white mouse, Gadget, who was the inventor. And they rode around on a nearsighted bald eagle, big thick glasses. And they were the Rescue Rangers. So we pitched that at a meeting with Michael Eisner. And they like the show. They like it a lot, but they don't feel anything for Kit Colby, the lead character. And that was the show or the meeting where I had pitched Gizmo Duck and, although Robo Duck at the time, Bubba Duck and the Alien Duck. Alien Duck didn't make it. The other two,
I don't remember an alien.
Yeah. Great, to put those in DuckTales. And I think I even said stupidly, I said, well, are you sure we're just not getting the character? Maybe if we see a little more. And they said, no, we got the Robo-Duck and the Bubba Duck in a picture and a few words. That's what we need on this guy. Anyway, meeting moved on. DuckTales, super successful. They were going through the line. We're still not going to touch Mickey. Donald's in DuckTales, kind of hard to animate. Um, Goofy, yes, develop Goofy. He can be anything because he's been an everyman character. Pluto, we're not going to do a show about the dog. And we got to Chip and Dale, and Michael Eisner said, put those chipmunks in that show. And previous, they said, look, guys, Michael loves the show. It's just not a home run yet. But as soon as he said, put those characters in that show, Jeffrey said, home run. And that changed all the dynamics because suddenly you have two leads. You don't need as many characters. The kangaroo rat became Monterey Jack. Zipper stayed Zipper. Gadget stayed in. And got rid of the eagle and instead made it an invention, the Ranger plane by Gadget. So that's how that happened. So I went from there and then, of course, to Darkwing Duck. And then after Darkwing Duck, I had a space show I really wanted to do. But that's when they said, no, now we're going to do shows based on features because of my feature background. And they had me do Aladdin. And then from Aladdin, did some home videos, then came back to series for Hercules and Buzz Lightyear Star Command. And then Team Atlantis. Never got done. And then more development, and then I was out the door.
Well, can I back you up to Darkwing? Because I see you have this amazing cell in the background, and personally, one of my favorites, and one of the guys I co-host is also a huge Darkwing fan. Let me get to my proper notes here. What was the inspiration for Darkwing?
I was ordered to create a show by Jeffrey Katzenberg with the title 00 Duck. There had been a DuckTales episode with Launchpad McQuack as a James Bond parody of 00 Duck called 00 Duck. Jeffrey loved the name. I don't even know if he saw the episode. He might have, because he told me it can't be Launchpad McQuack. It has to be a new character. And again, this goes back to we want a name that'll hook you in, and he loved like the name 00 Duck. So I wasn't super enthused about the idea. I just went into it to make it kind of a parody thing of all the stuff you would assume, of making fun of all the James Bond tropes. But it didn't really have any heart or sense of family. I basically stopped at that level of parody and pitched to Jeffrey, and he basically said he just like a laser pinpointed everything I thought was wrong with it. He says, got no sense of heart or no sense of family. There's no heart to it. You're just doing a parody. I recently have realized how lucky I was, because normally the thing is, I'm going to assign this to somebody else. Instead, he said, do it again. And now I went into it, and what I should have done the first time, how am I going to do this different? How am I going to do this in an interesting way? And in one of our brainstorming session which was the great thing about having writers on staff, and this paid off in several key shows. Dwayne Capizzi, story editor, who's got great credits, Men in Black and Alf was, I think, his first animated. Anyway, he said, seeing this duck in his suit and cape and mask, it's more like a pulp hero like Green Hornet or The Shadow. And I instantly brightened at that, because I love that stuff. I was too young to have grown up with the old radio stuff, but I knew them through comic fandom and heard old radio shows on tape and all of that. And suddenly that opened. Doc Savage had a team of guys who were all experts in different. He had an engineer and a chemist and a communications guy and a driver, and it was like, oh, that's a different way of building a team. That's nothing like James Bond, but we could do the same kind of thing. Problem is that was way too many characters. Finally, we got to the point where that heart that we needed, with the idea that he would adopt a daughter. Some of the early publicity called her an niece, and I think it was just people at Disney just assuming it's always Uncle Donald, Uncle Mickey, Darkwing,
Uncle Mickey.
But she was never a niece. She was always going to be adopted. And Launchpad had actually always been, probably because he was just in our thoughts from those early days, had always been part of the team. He was like a secondary. He thought he should be the hero, not this other guy, which seems very un-Launchpad to me now.
Yeah.
Anyway, it just became that trio. And as Frank Angonis, co-producer of the new DuckTales, said, "Tad, we know that it's the story of a father and a daughter and a Launchpad. That's the family. That's the heart of it. They love the idea, and we went out and we did not have the rights to use 00. That was owned by the James Bond, producers at the time. So we actually had a contest to rename him. Alan Burnett, who became the head story editor of Warner Brothers Batman. He's the one who came up with Darkwing. I added Duck to it because I wanted the dramatic and the silly. He won a prize, went on to do fantastic things. Anyway, and we didn't take the spy stuff out, but not being pinned down with that 00 name allowed me to really dive in what I grew up with, which was Silver Age comics. Even before Marvel, it was just how the DC comics at the time were just very silly. And we did a lot of that was, thank goodness there was no internet at the time, because had I been able to look up old covers and old stories, I probably would have tried to avoid them too much. Instead of saying, I remember Superman had a super evolved head, and then they did it with Lois. They did the same story with the Flash. Let's do something with a character with a giant head, giant brain. It was, I always told my writers, pitch me the comic book cover, because that way there's always a visual at the center of the story. Right. That we play our story against. But Darkwing at the studio was totally different. This is before Aladdin, and we had a character talking to camera and being smashed by safes and surviving. And I remember an executive said, "How do we have any jeopardy if you have a safe fall on him and he's fine? How do you even cut to a commercial?" And I said, "Because I'll play scary music and he'll look frightened." And that worked fine. You never questioned it, we actually told some emotional stuff in there, and it really had an effect on our audience, more than I knew until 30 years later. But that is how he came about. Some people, even people at the studio at the time, there's always people trying to connect dots. And there's people who thought, oh yeah, it was based on 00 Duck, and there was a Masked Mallard, was another episode of of DuckTales, where Scrooge puts on a superhero suit. I'm not sure to this day if I've ever seen the episode, but they just look at those and assume, they put those two things together, and that's what created Darkwing. It's like, no, I was ordered to do this spy show. We lost the rights to the spy, and with the new name, I was able to go toward comic books. That was the influence, was 100% Jeffrey ordering me to do something.
And thankfully he did. He went that direction with it. You brought up Goslin's adoption. And to me at the time when I was watching it, didn't mean anything. To me now, umpteen years later, means so much more. I'm an adoptive father, and seeing something way from back, when Darkwing was out, having a strong adoptive character and portrayed in such a positive manner, I think is absolutely brilliant and fantastic. So how did you come up? I mean, you mentioned that, okay, people say, niece, you went with the adopted part. What drove you to make her an adopted character, which was something even nowadays is still kind of not touched on as much?
Really, it was process of elimination. It's like what I didn't want in the story. I didn't want a mom. I didn't want, to explain why she's there and who the relatives were. And, I wanted to get more. We had the neighbors. We had the Muddlefoots. We didn't need a lot of more non-Darkwing elements to this series. And it just seemed like an adoption is why not? The main thing is I wanted Gosling to be a very broad character, every bit as funny as Darkwing. In fact, Gosling's probably my favorite character of the series. And I said, but you never doubt that those two love each other. Yeah. I said, I want them to hug. I want them to say they love each other, but they drive each other crazy. And that is what I had people come up to my table, 25 years later, now it's been 30, at a comic convention and, get teary-eyed because of how much that relationship meant to them, because it wasn't so much that these were adopted or foster children or anything. They just had really rough childhoods or problems with a father figure, or dad wasn't there. And that show was like an anchor to them. So that was it. I mean, I think it might have been Gary Kreisel or Jim Magon in discussing things early on. This is back on Gummies, just talking about, cartoon characters never touch each other, and just putting a hand on the shoulder gives you a visual closeness. And I always remembered that. And I, made that definitely part of our show in Darkwing Duck. And that is not lost. No spoilers, but Gosling will return in a new DuckTales. Coming up in, when is it? September, October, somewhere in there.
They
look
have
online.
Something. End of September starts the new season. I know it. I think it finishes up with at one point there's an hour-long Darkwing story.
Yeah, I would watch that.
End or the beginning. Yeah. I can't wait. I am big into Darkwing, and a lot of those reasons I like the superhero part. But I think what really pulled me into the character was, like you said, those family moments of, again, something that broke a lot of it wasn't a single mom parent. It's a single dad trying to raise a daughter. Yeah. And, you had
we used to describe it as what if Batman had a little girl who refused to stay at home?
Yeah.
Simple as that. That is probably a better explanation than the original Robin, because I'm Batman, I'm fighting crime. You know what I need is an 8-year-old helping me out in short pants. So, anyway, so that was it. The show did not sell to Michael and Jeffrey until we had that connection, because that's what made it different. You could do, there had been Underdog. There were other superhero parodies that had been done in live action. This is what made it unique, is that it was this trying to build this family and keep this family going while being a superhero. And again, not being cloying about it, to actually have this funny relationship. That's what, made the series as good as it is, I think.
Yeah. And then you came up with a great cast of supporting, or even I'll say the villain characters, with obviously parodies on different other type of superhero villains, mostly DC at the time, because DC was substantially more popular than Marvel, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, by the time of the show, they were more. I mean, Marvel was a phenomenon when it, about a year after it started. It was getting covered in Esquire magazine and all that way more college kids reading these comic books. Mm-hmm. But definitely Batman's Rogues Gallery, the Flash's Rogues Gallery, the Flash comic covers that I half remembered had a huge emphasis on the show. Spider-Man had a great Rogues Gallery. Those are the three top ones, I'd say. People, again, connect the dots. They always say bushroot, our vegetable duck, was based on Poison Ivy, and he's not at all. He was based on Plant Man, who was a villain in Strange Tales comic. Originally, he wore a big floppy hat and a dark cloak, and then he came back once in a very ridiculous leaf costume with big leaves off of his thing and leaf mask and all that. But what he did in those comics was make the trees bend down and swat people, and cactus throw needles. And the other part was a little bit of Swamp Thing from DC. Just the idea of you can't really kill this guy because if you chop him up, he's just going to grow again. So those two were Bushroot. Liquidator, people say, well, he's Hydro Man. And it's like Hydro Man hit in the gap of time where I was not reading comics. It was like college, and I didn't have there were no comic stores then. There was no place to get comics there. And it's just like, for a while I had someone buying them for me, and that just got clumsy. But he was actually based on the Sandman from Spider-Man, because in his Spider-Man number 4, I'm going to say, Sandman actually went through grates and, in some ways acted like water, but he was moving sand. And I believe whether in that issue or an early one, Spider-Man mixed concrete into the sand and hit him with water, which is, I believe, what we did with Liquidator. So he was what that character was based on.
Yeah.
Negaduck is just a classic, let's fit a hero into a good version, an evil version.
From the alternate universe.
Well, yeah, originally he wasn't that, and he was just Darkwing split in two. And at the end of it, I said, look, Jim loves doing both characters. It turns out to be easier than we thought to keep track of them, although there's some mistakes. Bring back Negaduck, and the writers said, how do we do that? It'll be the same story every time. I said, no, I don't want to see Posiduck. Nobody likes Posiduck. I said, just bring him back. And they said, how do we explain it? And my answer was, you don't. They never explained why any of Batman's villains were not in prison.
Right.
All they were not in Arkham.
Out of prison again.
They were just there for a new story. And that was the thing, famously people say, oh, Tad is anti-continuity. And it's like, no, on Darkwing Duck, it was that Silver Age continuity, which is a little bit of continuity, but not much. And you don't go out of your way to explain things. You just bring things in and use them as you need to do your story and your entertainment. So yes, we had we brought Gizmo Duck from DuckTales, but I had no clue what storyline had been, even though I had pitched the original character, he was really developed by the guys on DuckTales. I didn't know any of his storylines, and I didn't care. I needed him to come over as the Superman character, and people have said, no, you mean Iron Man. I said, no, Superman, because Superman was loved by everybody. Superman got the key to the city, had parades. He was this one, people cheered when they saw him. All the things that Darkwing Duck desperately wants and will never get. That's why we brought him in. When I say they're a different universe, it upset a lot of people. And they say, well, he's wrong about that. And it's like, it's just a way of explaining our thing. And it's like, they point to Launchpad. And I said, I point to Launchpad as proof. We redesigned Launchpad. We made him a great pilot and incredibly stupid. And then in the new DuckTales, Frank Aragonis made him even stupider and a bad pilot. So it was like the worst of both eras.
You get the combination of
hilarious, and he continues to be hilarious in a whole new way. So I love what they did with him. Anyway, so that's how I approached everything. What's the fun of the story? But the people asked why Negaduck was yellow, black, and red, and they tried to figure out a logical reason. I said, no, those are the colors of the Reverse Flash, the most famous, in my mind, evil counterpart to a hero, and those were cool, evil-looking colors to me. So that's all my early comic stuff, coming into the show.
Nothing wrong with that. That just in finding out that how much the comics, inspired you in helped you along in creating this show, I think just makes it even that much better.
Yeah. My regret is we had a very fast schedule. We had a ridiculous script schedule. And some things you just want to develop more, and like our Aquaman character was Neptunia, and I just felt like we didn't quite hit her. the way she should have been, and but yet I have people saying, "Oh, she's my favorite character" or something. Morgana Macabre, I think, was great in her original episodes. In her famous Justice Ducks, that got away from us in that, my way of thinking, because she's very much kind of like a insecure damsel in distress, and which works fine for the story, but it's like, man, her character was richer than that. We should have played on that. She was a little better as we brought her back, in other episodes with Darkwing. So, all the stuff was done on the fly, and not every episode is great. I love the episodes where we played with the universe, like the comic book classics, I think it is, where the story changes as different people are writing the comic, and somebody puts a coffee cup down on the comic page, and they run into a giant coffee cup. We, again, can't explain it logically, but it made for a hilarious episode.
I think most people have to realize it is a kids' TV show.
Yeah.
You have to just sit back and enjoy the fun that's being presented to you. I remember the one that I remember specifically the one that you're talking about, where they're writing the story as it plays out, and it kind of just keeps evolving in weird left turns whenever someone else picks up and takes over that was brilliant. You brought up Jim. Did you know when you were auditioning, I guess, for voices, Jim was your guy, or like how, what made you, or did you, when you listened to him, he's like, you know what, this guy might work, or
Jim Cummings?
He had done some stuff beforehand.
I mean, I met Jim Cummings on my season of the Gummy Bears, because by then he had taken over for Paul Winchell, and he was just a great guy, a billion voices, bounced off all the actors well, and all that. And we always tried to record all the actors together, which isn't done anymore, and are rarely done these days.
Yeah, he actually posted a video clip that someone recorded from one of the sessions.
That was me. I recorded. That was actually the read-through, I think, Justice Ducks, because there's a billion people in there.
Yeah, a whole bunch of people in one small room.
Group. Yeah. I wish I had done more of that. Anyway, when it came to Rescue Rangers, it was down to between Peter Cullen and Jim Cummings for the voice of Monterey Jack. And we went with Peter, could have gone with Jim, but Peter had just a slightly lower voice. It was not a huge thing. And then as we started recording, I just felt like we weren't getting the comedy out of the lines. And it's not like we had joke lines. It's like, no, you have to have more of a humorous take on the character, and you just say a line in a different way. It's not like I can coach you into it. But I knew it was there. And so we replaced Peter at the time with Jim, and suddenly, okay, now this is working. So I certainly knew him from there. I knew Rob Paulson from Gusto Gummy, and Paul is such a great guy. We brought him in all the time as a character. And so when it came to Darkwing, I'm sure we recorded other people. Auditioned them. I can't remember them. And I've not found a list of, maybe I might have found a list that were the usual suspects, all that. But Jim very much was in the lead. Once he got the job, Jim, as he says, I'm DW's dad. DW's mom is Jeannie McSwain, the voice director and casting director. That Jim would do a weird sound. There's a famous one, is Darkwing has this flattened voice that he does. When he's been hit or something.
Ow.
And in a second episode or something like that, he was hit again, and Jim did a different kind of a sound. And Ginny said, no, do that squash thing again. And she was constantly giving feedback to Jim about the character they were kind of building together. And then, of course, we had tapes of all the shows. Those are instantly given to writers who are trying to get literally write the voice. And so that's a feedback loop. So Jim was a huge, I did a kind of a convention in Russia where the Disney Afternoon is way bigger culturally than it is in any other country.
Wow.
And Jim made some comments, said, "Oh, I should have gone too." And it was like, you weren't Darkwing. They had a couple of Russian guys who did it. But Jim was part of that initial process, that feedback loop that helped create the character.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't matter that other people took over the voice in other countries. He was part of that central, the genesis of the character.
Well, from my understanding, he's gone saying that's one of his favorite all-time characters that he's ever done was Darkwing.
Yeah.
And he just breathes so much life into, like he does with so many of his other characters. But I guess there's something just a little extra special with his performance with Darkwing.
I mean, Jim was a huge comic fan too, and working with Chrissy as Goslin was special. And I think it was the mix of that show that helped make it more interesting to play that character. That he wasn't just Daffy Duck. He had this heart. He had these frustrations that were on an emotional level. We see an episode of what would have happened if Goslin left his life, So, I mean, that was, to me, an actor loves stuff like that. It's like, oh yeah, you can just do a goofy voice time and time again, but to be given a storyline or a central role that lets you play with different things, plus to get to be the negative version of himself.
Oh, yeah.
Was a whole other thing. So,
get to be your evil twin.
Yeah, exactly. So,
you brought up Justice Ducks. Now, from my little research, that there was at one point a pitch to do a Darkwing spin-off of Justice Ducks. Is there any truth behind that, or? Not
from me. You got to realize I always get asked, are there any episodes that you didn't get to do? Well, I don't know if "get" is the word. Mm-hmm. To get 3 premises approved, we generally pitched 7 premises or something like that. So there are all these ideas that could have become a great thing, or who knows, maybe those would have been crappy episodes. But and it's kind of the same thing with show pitches. There's all sorts of shows and variations of shows that came back time and time again. So I'm sure, especially we're very lucky. You always have like an executive assigned to a show, usually a mid-level executive who gives notes. And the idea is that here's somebody who knows your show well enough that they're informed, but it's still an outside voice that can say, oh, this is supposed to be an adventure show, and I'm not getting any adventure out of this episode, or is this a one-off, or, it's that kind of note. Well, luckily for us, our exec was Greg Wiseman, and Greg had been a DC Comics editor and actually had written several issues of Captain Atom comics, although I don't think he got credit at the time. So he knew everything we were playing with and could really give notes that helped that. And the other thing, he said, look, it's your show. I'm going to argue for what I think is, but ultimately you don't have to take my notes. I'm so thankful that he never told that to the boss, because there's no way the boss would let him get away with that.
No.
But he generally had good notes and all of that. So I'm sure if it wasn't Greg, it could have been to say, hey, here's a natural spinoff that we could have done. But, if it did happen, I don't know how detailed it was. And it probably just got passed on. It's just part of the process. And sometimes that's a marketing thing. It's like, no, we've sold a bunch of those characters, or the toys weren't that big. We want fresh stuff. And the main thing was, oh, we're going to do Aladdin now. We're going to do, different kinds of shows. So it might have been pitched. I can't say yay or nay to it.
Okay. How does it feel to see Darkwing's legacy has endured, into the fact that, again, people are still talking to you about it, telling life stories, and he's in the new show.
Oh, I mean, I love it. My two favorite projects of my career were Darkwing Duck and Hellboy Animated, for entirely different reasons. To see the DuckTales crew being made of fans of all those original shows, and then yet they're rebooting things in the proper way of, no, we're just not going to rehash it. We're not here to tell the same stories over. Mm-hmm. We're building a new universe. We're going to interconnect things and all that. And they had this master plan of Darkwing. They actually I always avoided a Darkwing origin. I gave him like 6. Right. They gave him a true origin, and Negaduck, of course, gets a true origin. And it threw people because Jim was doing the voice of the original character. Say, oh, that's the old Darkwing. And it's like, no, pay attention to the name. That's Jim Starling. This is Drake Mallard is the guy who shows up. That's the new Darkwing. I mean, they've taken me through all their dreams that they would love to do with that character. But, DuckTales is DuckTales. It's not Darkwing. Mm-hmm. So, I'm anxious to see the hour. But they understood from the get-go the heart of the character. They put things in storylines that, the idea that Darkwing never gives up. You knock him down, he never gives up. And they made that a thing that inspired Launchpad. So he's part of Launchpad's life. The old show was. Right. And it's like, we never talked about that, but it was like, as soon as I heard it, it was like, yeah, that definitely makes sense. That's exactly what the character did over and over again. We didn't use it on the level of a slogan or something, but it was like, but it is what he did. So there is that deep understanding. Again, Frank is the one who said it's the story of a father, daughter, and a Launchpad. He knew that he needed all three to really do the show. And it is, to me, a real reboot. When you see a new Sherlock Holmes movie, you don't expect it to be the same as the previous 2 or 3 Sherlock Holmes movies that all had different actors, and one was set in present day, and one was set in Victorian times, and one was in space with a robot Watson, and same with Robin Hood. And yet people just expected, why isn't this just Darkwing exactly as he is, or as he was? And as I like to say, those guys are doing DuckTales for this century. Yep. We did the one for the last century, So I'm super pleased, not only that the characters lived on, that they're doing a version of him that really does justice to, the original character, and they really understand it, yet it's a new version. And of course their show has super continuity, and that's perfectly fine. That makes great sense.
Yeah, the story arc for the new stuff is a lot more knitted together, and repercussions and characters showing up. I mean, what are your thoughts on the new show? I got Jim's
on DuckTales.
Yeah, I got Jim's take on it. I'm curious to see what your take on the new DuckTales is.
I love it. I think it's a much better show than the original show. Again, considering how fast we had to work back then and what they do now. When they were creating the show, they went back to the source material, not 1987 DuckTales alone. That's a huge part of it. They went back to Donald Duck comic strips, Uncle Scrooge comic strips, obviously Uncle Scrooge comics, Donald Duck short subjects, the Who Gets Stuck with All the Bad Luck. They made a huge part of his personality, which Karl Barks didn't do. They did the only thing they would have done differently, and they finally found a way to do it, is they loved the Karl Barks version of Donald, which is only possible if you can understand Donald Duck.
Right. So the tie-in.
Yeah. Karl Barks he knew how to write Donald Duck for a cartoon, but the Donald Duck for his comic books had no limitations at all. He was a super salesman. He spoke paragraphs of material at a time. so how they looked at each, looked at the essence of characters, I think, the idea of breaking up the nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, is to actually be different personalities. The only argument to not do that is to say, well, it's never been done that way before. And it's like,
right.
It is now, and why you have to go out of your way to explain really why would these three boys have the exact same personality and the same voice and all of that. The changes they did with Webby are just, she's a fantastic character. Those kids in that show are just refreshing. And, they're fans, not so much now because it's hugely popular, but early on we're saying, there's not enough Scrooge McDuck. And it was like, well, part of that was some of the early episodes reordered, but it's like they were given a mandate to make it the show about the adventures of the kids with their uncles, not the adventure of the uncles who sometimes brings the kids. It's like me being ordered to do a secret agent show. You've got certain marching orders, and maybe there's a fan out there who doesn't like those marching orders, and it's like, okay, but they were my marching orders.
So this is what I was told to do. So
yeah. But I just love the richness they bring to it, how they rethought things, how they interweave it, how playful they are with it, how much they set things up. Again, they asked me, how big was your writer's room? And I laughed. I said, there was no writer's room. You guys would come into my office and shout story ideas at me, and we'd shout back and forth until we had something, we had to turn out a script a week plus one every other week. That was just insane.
That's a lot.
So they plan out a whole season. They plan out character arcs. They think about things. The art director is in from day one, so he understands how to change the artwork and do stuff to it, mood-wise, that will enhance the story. Sometimes take the burden of the story to really do a lot with the visuals, so you don't have to do as much with the talking and all that. I'm just a huge fan of what they've done. I'd love to see them go on and do a Darkwing series, but people assume, obviously they're going to do it. I said, there's nothing obvious about things going on to Disney these days,
No.
Enjoy what you have. Yeah, exactly.
I like that they've actually even really brought Dumbella in as a character and not just a one-liner from an old old Donald Duck cartoon.
And they even explain why she's Della her name's Della, but it was Donald used to insult her by calling her Dumbella. Yeah. And Della is there's a case where they came up with the idea of her losing a leg on the moon, that she had to cut it off herself. And
right.
they worked with associations of people that work with people with prosthetics and all of that. So they portrayed it right, and they love how the character's been done. Same thing. I know they had discussions about Goslin and the whole, being an adopted child. How should that be portrayed? We didn't have time, but
right.
We just did what we thought was right. But there's all sorts of issues that
you're 3 hours behind on this script.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just a huge fan of what they do. The only thing wrong is they're not showing all the episodes to me right now.
How dare they? It's a shame that it's it's kind of winding down, but it's been an adventure. Speaking of adventures, and you brought up Aladdin a couple times. So what was it like to take on Aladdin? You had this mega movie hit the theaters, and now you're being told, okay, continue it on the small screen.
It was
scary. I mean, I would be terrified if someone said
it was not. Well, you realize it was done by friends of mine. So I went over and talked to Ron and John about what I'm being done. They didn't have a problem with it. But I know that you can't help to compare it to the feature film. We did not have the budget or the time of the feature film. So even our best episodes aren't. I was so self-conscious having started in features, would not come up to the level of what they did, in features. Plus, some storylines were great. It's fantastic in script and in storyboard, and then it goes to the wrong studio overseas, and it just didn't come out as well. And others, the script is just okay, goes to a great studio, and hooray, cause for enjoyment. But I was just I was very self-conscious about that, and of course, again, Return of Jafar came from, we always debuted in a multi-part episodes. Mm-hmm. And the main thing I wanted to do, that I said, if you took the genie out of the movie, Iago would steal the show because he was hilarious. He had all the good ideas. And I love the idea of having that guy in the middle of the good characters. Anyhow, I had to explain like how he could come out and Jafar didn't, and all of that. And, I brought up that technically we were doing the sequel to Aladdin to home video only as a means to keep our budget up. I thought if there was another revenue stream coming off of our stuff, our budgets wouldn't be cut because they were starting to get tight. And I pitched it twice because they weren't interested the first time. But after they released Aladdin on video, they became very interested. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, created, that started the whole direct-to-video stuff at Disney. Universal had it in the works already to do the first ones because I later did one for Universal. But, I don't know, Jafar was made for like $3.5 million and made $180 to $200 million domestic or more. So it was like, that was something.
Yeah, they were happy with that.
So anyway, on that level, I mean, the idea of the adventures and all of that, my favorite episodes are the ones that are more fairy tale like or mm-hmm. Arabian Nights like. It was just fun writing for the genie. Dan Castellaneto's fantastic as the genie.
That must have been hard to try and to reconcept, because I think out of all the voice actors, is the one that you did, but inevitably for one reason or another had to change up.
Well, the writer still wrote him as if he was Robin Williams. It was up to Dan to create a different personality, which he did. And then, of course, we got Robin back to do Aladdin and the King of Thieves. And he even mixed up when talking about Aladdin in other interviews. He mm-hmm. mixed up talking about the feature film, basically quoting gags out of our projects, which, made us feel good. So anyway, it was daunting. Once we got into it, I have to forget about the judgment of things, and just go on and do the series. So again, some episodes better than others, but on the whole, it's a lot of fun. I've had James Silvani, who does the Darkwing Duck comic books. We often, when we're at conventions, I'm sitting next to him and Amy Meverson, who did the Pocket Princesses and now the Disney Princess comics, and designed rows of princess toys and Baby Yoda toys for Hasbro. Anyway, James would always say, why don't you draw Aladdin and Jasmine, and Genie? Because I sell original art at cons, but I only do my shows. Right. At least Rangers and Darkwing, a few gummies thrown in. And I said, well, one, they're really hard to draw, James. And two, I said, those are Ron and John's characters more than that. But the nostalgia window always moves. And I'm starting to get requests for Buzz Lightyear characters, and I'd say, I have to start practicing. Anyway, so Aladdin was daunting, still a lot of fun, a big adventure. And then it looked, I was in video for a while, and they were doing Hercules. They were trying to figure out who would run the Hercules show. And evidently, like the day before, one of the guys in management said, God, Tad would be perfect for this show, but we can't even bring it up to him. And that it's like the next day I came down because I just didn't like where my pathway might be. And I said, is there anything in TV animation that I could work on? I mean, in series that I could work on? And it was like, how about this?
Oh, here you go.
Although Hercules was one of the best looking shows we did. And story-wise, it was Bob Scully and Mark McCorkle who created Kim Possible. They did a fantastic job of that series to really create the storylines and the humor. And, we got this fantastic guest star cast coming in, and they would always capture the voice of those stars and putting them in. So that was a fantastic show on a whole different level. We killed ourselves doing songs in every episode because they were such a big part of the movie. And then, we did some testing after we were done. It was like kids are saying, yeah, there's so many songs. They always saw the songs as stopping the story instead of moving it along. It was
right.
like, oh God, we could have saved ourselves a lot of work. So that was that. And then backed up to that, we had to do Buzz Lightyear.
So was there much difference between how you approached or just having to deal with Aladdin, Hercules, and then Buzz Lightyear, or was it kind of the same process? Did you kind of get into a groove?
Actually, usually you don't have to do two shows back to back. So it's like as we're finishing up Aladdin, while we're working on Aladdin, the next show is starting to be in work, and that might have been Tarzan at the time. Whatever, it's another series. So the only thing you have to watch out for as a producer is that's when they start stealing your best artists to start going on to have the strongest artists to start the next series. It was something you always had to prepare for. Hercules, we pitched one show. Michael said, yeah, let's do it. And then they said, well, you don't really have a show yet. And I had to try to revamp our ideas, came up with the teenage one, which was a shock to Ron and John because they felt like, Tad, we did the perfect show for you. We did Superman and you didn't do it. And I said, yeah, because it's really hard to write Superman stories.
Yeah.
But Superboy we can deal with because of high school stuff. Anyway, for whatever reason, schedule-wise, they wanted us to then do Buzz Lightyear. So I tried to get the guys to I said, you have to take Fridays off and just devote it to Buzz Lightyear. You have to pretend that you only have 4 days to do your job, and then that 5th day is the new job. And they just wouldn't do that because, well, we've got work. And it's like, you always are going to have work. So I did beginning stuff on Buzz Lightyear and create some of the characters and all of that. And it's the early visual stuff, but it was a more contained kind of show in a lot of ways. Then they finally got free. They started doing it, and they basically, aside from all the development I did, stories-wise and series-wise, development, they kind of started from scratch. And they said, okay, should this be a buddy cop show? And, the challenge of doing that show was that, because this is just after Toy Story, that there was, Buzz was a fish out of water. He thought he was a real spaceman, not a toy. And a lot of the humor of Toy Story, the bulk of it, when it comes to Buzz Lightyear, is about that.
Yeah.
Suddenly we have a show where the spaceman is a spaceman. There is not a disconnect. So it was like, how do we get the same sort of humor out of that? So that was really hard. And we came up with the idea of cadets to make them kind of as a group, kind of these underdogs.
Was that your idea, or was that the idea that was presented to you to work with?
No, they just said we're doing a Buzz Lightyear show, so
okay.
we had to work that out. Anyway, then in the middle of it, we're in production, and we say, this is coming out before, because by that time, Toy Story 2, which had been a home video project, was taken over by Pixar. And we said it's going to come out before the movie. Is that okay? And Eisner didn't have any problem with that. And then, I don't know, months later, we have a second meeting, kind of an update thing, and there was a different executive in the room. He said, who said, "Wait, this is coming out before the movie? You can't do that." Michael Eisner said, "Yeah, you can't do that." So the nice thing about that was we stayed in production. It didn't affect us any. But when it came time to do that opening movie, instead of having to do it early in the show or in the middle of the show, it was the last thing we did. And that meant that all the basic designs of characters and aliens and space and Star Command and hallways and spaceship robots, all that was designed. So the money we had for that episode could all go to new stuff or new special effects. And, you know, we didn't have to just, what color do we paint the walls kind of thing. So that really helped the quality of that. Patrick Warburton was fantastic as Buzz Lightyear. He was hilarious.
I love Patrick Warburton.
Yeah.
I think not just because he's from New Jersey, where I am, but just, you know, his sense of his timing and just the way he works. Actually, I love him and I love Tim Allen both.
It's funny about his timing because obviously Patrick is a unique person. Yeah. When they said, "Oh, we're going to get Tim Allen, we're going to pay him a bunch of money. He's going to do the voice for the video release of the Buzz Lightyear Star Command." It was all animated, mostly animated. Yeah, I think it was finished. So he had to basically ADR. He had to do the voice to picture, and Tim Allen was going crazy because he knew how he would just do Buzz.
Now
he had Patrick Warburton in his ear with this whole different spacing of words and how to play things. So he goes, "What is with this guy?" You know, and it came out fine. It made for a good transition from movie to video to series. But that was funny. And I got to be little aliens in the credit song where William Shatner sings to infinity and beyond, and the little green men sing back up. The little green men are me.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And in a personal note, it was like I did those voices in the same spot where the A&W, it was literally 2 blocks up from my mom's house. So it was the same spot where A&W Root Beers was that we used to walk to when I was a kid. I had my first deep fried burrito there. What is this wonderful food? And you know, it had all been torn down. This new building at its place, and I realized I'm pretty much here. I should be drinking a root beer. But that was fun.
So that's an interesting circle to end back kind of in one of your childhood areas recording. You know.
Oh yeah, back in Burbank.
Yeah.
I think we recorded the soundtrack to, especially our early shows. We actually got to do big orchestras. I think, was it Darkwing? That might have been recorded at the Evergreen Studios, at least one of the which was just also a couple blocks from my mom's house, across the street from 31 Flavors, my first job. And it used to be the Magnolia Theater, where I went and saw movies for 35 cents or whatever. And that had been a recording theater. So yeah, my footsteps were all over the same area, from growing up in Burbank to, you know, finishing up my career at Disney.
Yeah, I didn't have to travel too far.
Yeah.
So you finally got to do your space program with Buzz Lightyear. Did any of the ideas from Mickey and the Space Pirates make their way to Buzz Lightyear?
I always carry ideas, but right after Darkwing, I pitched a science fiction show that I really wanted to do, and everybody on staff liked it. Gary Krauss just didn't get it. He didn't understand the draw of it. Mm-hmm. Months later, he explained how they had pitched a show using my artwork with a whole different storyline. And I said, that's just the Jetsons. and which is exactly what Eisner and Katzenberg said, and they passed on it. But they used all my artwork, and I said, Gary, I did all that artwork on my own time at home.
Yeah.
Now it's poisoned. I can't use it again to pitch. He goes, oh, sorry, but it didn't matter because from then on, my destiny was going to be tied to, feature spin-offs.
Yeah.
But anyway, that had more of the ideas. And then Buzz Lightyear was a show that really Bob and Mark, even more than Hercules, ran the story. And then that's when I said, as much as I love the guys, I said, I'm actually a storyteller. I've always run the story of my shows, and that's what I want to continue to do. And that's when they went off and did Kim Possible, and I did development. Did I do anything else after? Well, I did Team Atlantis, which we got 3 episodes out and put into a DVD. And that was it after that. So.
Did you have any big ideas for Team Atlantis? Anything like, I can't wait we're going to work on this and take the story there?
We had all sorts of ideas because it was like, well, I'm never going to get to do Hellboy, so I'm going to put all the ideas into this show. And Mike Mignola was helping us out with creature designs. So we had all sorts of things. But then as we got more and more notes, it got to a point, the writers were way ahead of the rest of the staff because, we're coming up with premises for show 40. We have outlines, ready for the 20s and 30s. There are scripts in the teens, and the staff is just doing the, 1 through 12 or something like that. So, and it got to a point where I actually said, I don't know what show we're doing now, because it had just, we got ridiculous things that were just making it like every other show you don't remember growing up.
So chaotic.
So there was tons that we wanted to do and could have done. In fact, the premise of the show originally was they each had part of the crystal, and it had been set up in the movie that Kida, who had the crystal, was, I don't know, hundreds of years old or something like that. So the idea is that these guys would actually age. We could tell adventures in World War I, World War II, the 50s, modern day. We could have fun with that. Yeah. And we were ultimately told, no, the time travel stuff is too confusing. It's like, it's not time travel. They're just long lived. Right. And so that was one thing. But, I understand simplifying it. We love the motif of it and all. And it was just the idea that once that crystal was energized at this underground, that energy, it was like a beaming energy, like Tesla proposed, that all these artifacts that had been spread around the world by the Atlantean traders and merchants would suddenly start working again. So you think it's a weird sculpture or an ancient vase. It turns out, no, it's a matter transporter. It's it's all that. The idea that suddenly there's all this stuff that can be used for good or evil, or just is dangerous because no one knows what it is, and it's suddenly activated. So that was the big adventure, is kind of recovering all those artifacts and either deactivating them or recovering them. So it was just, it would have been a great show. But sadly, the staff had to be laid off on Friday the 13th. And the staff was just, the staff was just getting into the great scripts, some of the best ones we'd done. And they said, this is going to be the best show ever. They were really pumped for it. And suddenly it, went away because the feature didn't perform.
Yeah. Because it sounds like a fantastic show. I would have loved to watch a show like that.
Oh yeah, me too.
It sounds great. Well, you never know. It sounds reminiscent of some things that Marvel has done with some of their stuff now, with the artifacts from things spread out across the planet and having to recover and fix things. But I don't know. I think with the time travel, not the time travel, but the progression through history.
There's all sorts of things we could have done with that, but just telling a big out and out adventure story. It was kind of doomed from the start because we thought it was going to be on the new station called Toon Disney, and it ended up being on one Saturday morning, and it was like, we're doing kind of this big action adventure thing, and one Saturday morning is kind of Nickelodeon at the time.
Yeah.
It was Doug and Pepper Ann and, you know, Recess, all fantastic shows, but aren't the natural lead-ins to
different audience
shoot some stuff. Yeah, exactly. So as soon as the movie didn't do well, it was the excuse for ABC to drop the show, and everybody said hands off and all of that. So, but again, there was a misunderstanding from the top that the executive who worked so hard to sell the show was the one that, once the show was going, gave the worst notes. At one point, he said the famous line, "Why do we need Jeopardy?" Because we had these monsters. And I said, they provide the Jeopardy of the episode. Yeah. So why do we need Jeopardy? It's like, we threatened to make that into T-shirts. It's like, have you read anything about writing, drama, movies, anything? So
story arc, tension, the climax, and
he was the one who drew my career at TV animation to a close, and then went to features and fired John Musker and Ron Clemens. And Ron and John Lasseter came back and said, "You don't fire your heritage," and immediately brought those guys back. So it was just a dark time in the Empire.
Yeah.
But it would have been really would have enjoyed the show. And then it turned out I got to do Hellboy, which was supposed to be at first a series, turned into direct-to-videos, was going to be a whole series of direct-to-videos, but the company was sold to Starz, who said, "Oh, we don't want to put our money into original projects like this." So we did two, wrote one additional one, and that was that. But they were fun. They were a lot of fun.
Well, at least you got a little bit of it, but not the whole thing. But you ended up on Hellboy where you wanted to. Was that a comic book that that came out well after your years initially in the comic book area?
But I had when I came back to TV or when I came to TV animation, the guy said, "Hey, do you want to come with us to the comic book store?" And I went, "Comic book store? What's that?" And the world had changed, and that was like a great time to get back into it, because that's when Frank Miller's Dark Knight came out, Watchmen, just some incredible Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. There's just some incredible shift in comics being taken more seriously and just doing adventurous things. So yeah, I knew Hellboy from the start. I had all the issues and was a huge fan, was online as a fan, and at hellboy.com. And I have friends who I made from that fandom who actually ended up staying at my house and us going to San Diego together, or the Hellboy premiere or whatever, that I still am friends with today. So yeah, I was a true fan of that character.
So now I
have a bunch of original art on my wall, from Mike Mignola.
Well, I see this. I see a couple statues. I can't see the art, but so to be able to work on that must have been fantastic.
Hopefully I won't knock anything over as I'm doing the pen. Okay, there.
Okay, there's a little more.
Point up.
Oh yeah! Wow.
So, and on top there's a right hand of doom. So, all right. Something's buzzy now. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I still hear you.
Okay.
We're still good.
All right. I think I must have knocked some wire or something, because now I've got a feedback hum.
Sorry.
It's okay as long as it's not coming through.
No, I don't hear it. So the audience won't. Too bad the audience won't be able to see some amazing collection that you have there of this stuff. So to be a fan and to be able to be part of that must have been just. Oh yeah, very much so. Having your cake and eating it too, really. At that point.
It's more than that. I mean, Mike is a. Hold on for a sec. Oh, I won't know how to track it down. Mike is one of the most creative people on the planet, and it was so great just bouncing ideas off of him and working with him. So that was, an inspiration to me, both on a creative level and for the particular project. So yeah, I was like I say, the other highlight of my career was the Hellboy movies, because I got to write in a different way. You always write for yourself in that, but like with Darkwing, we wrote for ourselves, but you have to include the kids.
Yeah.
With Hellboy, it was like, okay, we're not writing Scooby-Doo. We're not, if it's going to be a haunted house, we're not going to worry about saying, oh, Scooby, it's a haunted house. No, we're going to go into a house and then prove to you that it's haunted by the way the characters react and all that.
Mm-hmm. So you
different. So
limitations.
I mean, that was So not as many limitations, but basically saying, let's do an animated horror movie, and I just really loved having that stuff staged out and things that we did in the artwork. I had great directors, Phil Weinstein and Vic Cook, both who had worked with me at Disney. Vic worked on several of my shows. So, it was just a great project,
That's
Again,
fantastic.
would have liked bigger budget,
Well,
more time, but
weren't you always?
Yeah. Well, it was like the first two movies had to be overlapped, so there was no learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we wrote the third movie that never got made, it was like, okay, then we had a learning curve. It's like, okay, we know this sort of stuff doesn't work as well as this stuff. Let's make more of that. So the first movie was a kind of a tribute to Mike's short stories that he did with Hellboy. Although they were all Japanese little short stories tied together. The second one was Hellboy's roots in vampires and werewolves and Central European horror mythology. And then the third one was to be the pulp adventure side of Hellboy, the Nazis, mad scientists, heads in jars flying around, cyber gorillas, Lobster Johnson. It was like, that possibly would have been the best one. And we kind of told our origin of Hellboy, which slightly tweaked, which characters are there and what they did. No, that was great fun. Hopefully those would have been. We should have done like 7 of them. That would have been fantastic.
You never know. You never know when things may come back around. But
it'll be somebody else these days.
Yeah. So, out of all those characters that you've gone to work through through your career and create or expand upon and whatnot, if you could go to, say, dinner or to that A&W root beer and sit down with one of them and just kick back and chew the fat, which one would it be?
Sit back with who?
Sit back and chew the fat. Just sit back and talk with one of
with who?
One of your any of your fictional characters that you've created or worked with throughout the years.
Oh, probably Hellboy would be the one who'd have the most interesting stories, and you could actually have a conversation with, having a conversation with Darkwing Duck, and Goslin would be more of a disaster about what Goslin would be getting into, and so we'd start talking. As long as it was about Darkwing, he'd be fine, but while I'm trying to keep Darkwing calm, Goslin would be inside A&W and playing with hey, look what I can do with the soda fountain,
Cool, if I put this here, it goes up my nose and tastes like...
Yeah, exactly. So look, I can squirt it out of my nose if I put it here. So, so yeah, that's, crazy question, but yeah, those, again, there are downsides of both. Hellboy, you would hope you'd get through without something ectoplasmic coming up to attack him.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Dad, thank you so much.
All right, it's been fun.
It's been a pleasure. And again, thank you for everything that you did contribute to my upbringing with the Disney Afternoon and the series after that. I'm still waiting for those to show up on Disney Plus, and hopefully one day we can watch Buzz Lightyear and Aladdin and those on there, because my boys are big Aladdin fans. And just being able to only show them the 3 movies, as it were, they always want more. So I
think, basically I have no idea of why certain things were held. I know Lasseter wasn't a fan of of the Buzz Lightyear show, even though, I mean, I knew John, and, you know, it started with Pixar animation, but in his mind, the show Buzz was based on was this big adventure show, and you see those little Buzz Lightyear short subjects at the beginning of some of his movies. And it's like, yeah, how long did it take you guys to conceive and storyboard that 4-minute sequence or whatever, and we have to do 22 minutes every week? You know, right. It's like there's a, you know, so I understand his feelings, but he's no longer at Disney, famously. Nope. So and Aladdin, it kind of surprised me that it's not on there. So I have to assume sooner or later it'll pop up, because they always want to. It's not like they put everything they own on at once. They have to not only create new stuff, but they have to say, hey, look what we're pulling out of the vault. So I assume that stuff. There's no legal reason not to bring back, you know, stuff like that they own 100% of.
No. It and that's kind of been my theory, is that it will get there eventually. It's, you know, you need to keep on putting new things on to keep people interested.
Yeah.
So again,
they can't all be Hamiltons.
Yeah. Oh, it's been a blast. Thank you so much, and thank you for being on and sharing all these stories.
All right. Well, let's hope you cut it down to the good stuff. And
I don't.
And although normally I would end by saying stay dangerous, and this time I will say stay safe.
Thank you. Yes, and you as well.
Thank you. So long.
Thank you again to the amazing Tad Stones for coming on and sharing all those amazing stories regarding Darkwing Duck, the Disney Afternoon, his Imagineering, and everything beyond that, with the Disney animation and his journey outside of Disney animation. Thank you so much again. And so what is some of your favorite work that Tad worked on? Was it, you know, Aladdin? Was it Hercules? Was it Buzz Lightyear? Darkwing Duck, Rescue Rangers? Let us know. Shout out on Facebook, put it in the comments, facebook.com/Disney Marvels Podcast, or on our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/Disney Marvels Podcast. You can also find us on the Twitter at Disney Marvels, on Instagram at Disney Marvels Podcast. You can also email the show with your answers or suggestions, ideas for upcoming episodes, or just questions in general to disneymarvels@gmail.com. You can also leave a voice message through the Anchor app or website. Links to everything is in the show notes. I want to thank you for your time. Again, you know, 101 episodes into the show. It wouldn't be, this show would not be anything if it wasn't for you and the time that you've invested in listening to me babble on for all these episodes with friends, with guests, by myself, however it is. It means so much. I know how busy everyone's lives are, and the fact that you've spent all this time, any of this time, with me means a lot. If I could just ask you, as I do all the time, please just share out. Let people know about the show. If you know what people that are into Disney, hey, check out the Disney Marvel Podcast. If you do or you want, go onto iTunes, rate the show. That helps people find out about the show. I mean, we've been doing great, 5-star rating across the board. I am humbled by that. It leaves me speechless at the fact that the only rating that we've gotten from everybody so far is 5 stars. I am truly deeply honored by your gratitude. Keep it going. Keep it going, though. And, let people know about the shows this way. And don't forget to become a subscriber. And also consider becoming a premium subscriber to the show. You can do this over at anchor.fm/DisneyMarvels/support, or you can find our Patreon page where you can get some cool little gifts. Or also to help the show, go to the Disney Marvel shop to get some Disney Marvel gear to wear around, just wherever you want. If you're going to the parks, if you're just going to the grocery store, I get a lot of compliments for my Disney Marvel stuff that I wear where I go grocery shopping. So might as well join in. Links to all that is also in the show notes. Okay. Whatever you're facing out there, all the difficulties, all the duress and uncertain times that we are in, you are not alone. Even though maybe sometimes it feels that way, you really are not alone. I believe in you, and you should believe in you too. You are strong enough, you are worth it. There is a light that's inside of you. Embrace that light, grab hold, and it will lift you up and shine for the world to see how special and truly amazing you are, and beautiful. Don't give up on yourself. This too shall pass. And you will get through this and you'll be stronger than you've ever realized. Now I'd like to end this week's show with a quote from Walt Disney. We're all proud of the honors that many groups around the world have given us. And we're even more proud that the public, whether in theaters, at Disneyland, or in their homes, continue to express its faith in the kind of family entertainment we produce. Again, that's Walt Disney. Thank you again for everyone for listening, and I'll see you next time.